It started like so many crime stories do, not with a gunfight, not with a high-speed chase, but with something small. A shopkeeper in East Yorkshire flagged a few packages. They looked off, too heavy, too frequent, too strange. From those parcels, detectives began pulling at a thread, and what unraveled was astonishing. A family, not a cartel in the jungles of Colombia, not an international mob, but a family in their 70s and their grown son, quietly moving drugs and laundering hundreds of thousands of pounds right under everyone's noses. At the center was Daniel Cotson, 43 years old. On the surface, he wasn't living the kind of lifestyle that made neighbors whisper, but behind the scenes, Daniel was receiving staggering amounts of money, £812,797 over just 2 years, shuttled through third-party transfers that should have set off alarms. Instead of sitting on it, he moved £534,000 into the savings account of his parents, Paul and Stephanie Cotson, aged 71 and 70. And here's the kicker. While this was going on, the family still claimed benefits. Police later calculated that, all told, they had invested nearly £500,000, all while playing the role of an ordinary household. Neighbours knew Paul and Stephanie as an older couple with a respectable pub history. Back in 2006, they'd even bought a place called the Old English Gentleman. Who would suspect them of fronting a laundering operation? Who would look twice at pensioners? That was part of the genius. They blended in, but by the spring of 2021, the cracks were showing. Investigators trailed Daniel, watching him carry postal bags bulging with tablets and cocaine. On one raid, they seized 32 postal bags, and inside the Cotsons' home, they found tablets worth nearly £45,000, cash, and more drugs. The evidence was piling up. It wasn't just another bust. It was the collapse of an empire built on the most unlikely foundation: trust in a family unit, a son moving drugs, parents helping wash the money, a dynasty of deception operating in plain sight. Once investigators peeled back the family's quiet facade, the machinery of their operation came into focus, and it was surprisingly sophisticated. On the surface, Daniel Cotson was just another man running errands, but when police caught up with him outside a post office, he wasn't carrying letters or birthday parcels. He had 2 full postal bags stuffed with packages that detectives later confirmed contained illicit substances. This wasn't a one-off. For months, he had been using postal services as the veins of his network, sending out tablets, powders, and wraps of cocaine across the country. What made the Cotsons scheme work wasn't just the supply of drugs, it was how they made the money disappear. Between 2018 and 2020, Daniel's accounts received £812,797 in transfers. These weren't straightforward deposits. They came through third-party accounts, small amounts moving in rapid succession. Layer by layer, he created the illusion of legitimacy. Then came the handoff. Daniel funneled more than £534,000 into his parents' savings account. To anyone glancing casually, Paul and Stephanie looked like cautious pensioners building a nest egg. But those funds weren't savings. They were the clean profits of a drug business running on steroids. The Cotsons didn't stop there. They reinvested £460,000, bolstering their finances while still claiming state benefits. That combination, high investments alongside welfare claims, is what eventually set off red flags in financial checks. And there was the pub. Back in 2006, the family had purchased the Old English Gentleman, a local bar that gave them a ready-made front. Pubs are cash-heavy businesses. Money flows in and out with little trace. For investigators, it was the perfect camouflage for a laundering network that blurred dirty cash with everyday pint sales. What shocked detectives most wasn't just the numbers, it was the normality. An aging couple, a son who blended into daily life, and a small business. Together, they created a smokescreen convincing enough to hide almost £1 million in criminal proceeds. But as the money kept rolling in, their confidence grew, and confidence in the world of crime almost always leads to mistakes. For a while, the Cotsons had built the perfect illusion: ordinary family, ordinary life. But in crime, the smallest cracks can bring down an entire empire, and in their case, those cracks appeared in plain brown packaging. It was May 2021 when a shop flagged something unusual. Packages Daniel was dropping off didn't match what you'd expect from everyday customers. They were too frequent, too heavy, and the destinations raised questions. Postal staff had seen enough to call it in. That single alert became the beginning of the end. When officers followed up, they discovered Daniel wasn't sending birthday gifts or online sales. He was moving drugs on an industrial scale through Britain's postal system. On one stop, they seized 32 full postal bags tied to him. Inside, controlled tablets worth nearly £45,000, plus cocaine, cash, and handwritten notes tracking the flow of product and money. The mistake was simple. He got comfortable. Using the post office repeatedly meant leaving a trail. Each package was another breadcrumb leading investigators closer. Unlike street-level dealers, Daniel's operation relied on a system that could be traced and audited. And once police had their eyes on him, the illusion of invisibility vanished. The other mistake: money. Daniel thought funneling funds into his parents' account would hide the origin. But financial investigators noticed the mismatch. Paul and Stephanie were claiming benefits, while £534,000 sat in their savings. Their official income didn't square with their investments. That inconsistency screamed for closer inspection. And then there was the pub. The old English gentleman wasn't bustling enough to justify the kind of money being moved around. In laundering, the cover has to be proportionate to the flow. The Cotsons' front didn't add up. Each of these mistakes compounded the others: suspicious parcels, inconsistent finances, a pub that couldn't cover the cash. By late 2021, detectives were no longer guessing. They were building a rock-solid case. For the Cotsons, the image of being a respectable family was about to shatter, and the police were preparing for the strike that would bring the whole operation crashing down. By the end of 2021, detectives had seen enough. The Cotsons weren't just dabbling in crime. They were running a well-oiled machine that had already pushed hundreds of thousands of pounds through the system. It was time to move. Surveillance had confirmed what investigators suspected. Daniel was the courier, the handler, the man constantly on the move with parcels that never quite looked right. His parents, Paul and Stephanie, were the anchors, their bank accounts quietly soaking up over £500,000 of dirty cash. On the morning of the raid, officers watched as Daniel headed once again to a post office. This time, he was carrying 2 full postal bags. Only now, the watchers didn't hang back. They swooped in, arresting him on the spot. Inside those bags were the same illicit tablets and powders that had set the whole investigation in motion. Simultaneously, police hit the Cotson homes. What they uncovered went far beyond a few packages. At Daniel's address, they found stacks of tablets worth nearly £45,000, cocaine, handwritten records, and cash. At his parents' place, financial documents confirmed the transfers, £534,000 sitting in savings, while the couple continued to claim benefits. The raids painted a vivid picture of the scheme. Drugs funneled through the post, profits washed through a pensioner couple's accounts, and investments made as if the money was clean. The veneer of respectability crumbled in a single morning. For the detectives, it was the validation of months of patient work, tracking packages, following money trails, comparing bank data against benefits claims, and documenting every move the family made. For the Cotsons, it was the beginning of the end. Neighbors were stunned. People who knew Paul and Stephanie couldn't believe the couple in their 70s were laundering drug money for their son. The image of a harmless, aging pair of grandparents was gone, replaced by headlines calling them accomplices in a family-run criminal enterprise. And now, with the evidence piled high, the case was ready to move from the streets into the courtroom. When the Cotsons finally stepped into court, the double life they had built unraveled in public. What had once been whispers and suspicion now became headlines. Family ran £800,000 drug and money laundering scheme. The prosecution laid it out piece by piece. They showed jurors the seized postal bags, the cocaine and tablets pulled from Daniel's address, and the handwritten records that mapped out orders and profits like ledgers of a hidden business. They revealed the transfers, £812,797 flowing into Daniel's accounts, and then over £534,000 funneled into Paul and Stephanie's savings. What hit hardest was the contradiction. Paul and Stephanie, pensioners in their 70s, were still claiming benefits, while hundreds of thousands sat untouched in their accounts. Prosecutors described it as a calculated conspiracy to convert criminal property, using age and normality as shields. Daniel, facing overwhelming evidence, pleaded guilty to multiple drug and money laundering charges. Paul and Stephanie denied their role, insisting they had no idea what their son was doing. But over 4 days, jurors heard the financial evidence, saw the paper trail, and drew their own conclusions. The couple was convicted of conspiring with their son to launder money from the drug trade. For the court, the case was clear. The Cotsons weren't unlucky parents dragged into something unknowingly. They were part of the machine. They had accepted and moved dirty money, allowing Daniel's operation to function on a scale that would have been impossible alone. Sentencing was scheduled for the 14th of November, but the verdict was already devastating. A 43-year-old son, a 71-year-old father, and a 70-year-old mother, all branded criminals, a family name tied not to quiet respectability, but to drugs, deception, and greed. For investigators, it was a victory. For the Cotsons, it was the final chapter in a life they thought they could keep hidden. When news of the Cotsons' conviction broke, East Yorkshire was left reeling. How could a family that seemed so ordinary, a retired couple and their middle-aged son, be at the heart of a criminal operation worth more than £800,000? For neighbours, the revelations were jarring. Paul and Stephanie weren't shadowy figures. They were grandparents, the kind of people you might nod to at the shop or see walking slowly down the street. Few could reconcile the idea that these same pensioners had been helping to wash the proceeds of a drug business. The sense of betrayal ran deep. Communities rely on trust, on the assumption that the people next door are just living their lives. When that illusion shatters, it leaves scars. To many locals, the Cotson story wasn't just about crime. It was about how easily crime can hide behind a mask of normality. Police officials used the moment to send a message. Detective Inspector Mark G. of Humberside Police called it a clear reminder that no matter how carefully criminals try to disguise their activity, they will eventually be exposed. He stressed that the Cotsons' downfall wasn't just about luck, it was about vigilance, about one alert over suspicious parcels that sparked an investigation. The case also touched on a wider issue: how organised crime in the UK isn't always run by hardened gangsters in flashy cars. Sometimes it's built into families, small businesses, and quiet streets. That makes it harder to spot, but also more dangerous, because it thrives where people least expect it. For the Cotsons, the aftermath was brutal. A son facing years behind bars, parents in their 70s branded as criminals in national news, a reputation in ruins, and for the community, a chilling reminder that sometimes the biggest secrets sit right behind the neat hedges and quiet windows of ordinary homes. The Cotson case isn't just a story about one family. It's a case study in how modern crime adapts, disguises itself, and thrives where people least expect it. For decades, drug empires have been portrayed as the work of cartels and gangs, armed enforcers, lavish lifestyles, and violent turf wars. But the Cotsons showed another reality. Crime can be quiet. It can look like a pensioner couple with savings, a middle-aged man running errands, and a family pub that once seemed like nothing more than a neighborhood watering hole. Their story underlines one uncomfortable truth: money laundering doesn't always look suspicious. In fact, the most effective laundering is designed to look boring. Regular bank transfers, modest investments, benefit claims, all of it blending into the background noise of everyday life. That camouflage is what kept the Cotsons operation running for years. It also highlights the fragility of oversight systems. Banks missed the red flags. Benefits checks didn't catch the contradiction between massive savings and welfare claims. And it took a simple postal worker raising suspicions for the whole structure to collapse. That suggests not just the cleverness of criminals, but the gaps that still exist in the system meant to stop them. For law enforcement, the lesson is clear. Crime isn't always loud. It's subtle. It's embedded in families and communities, and catching it requires more than chasing street dealers. It requires tracking financial flows, cross-checking benefits, and paying attention to the ordinary. For the public, the lesson is equally sobering. If crime can hide behind grandparents in their 70s, it can hide anywhere. That doesn't mean suspicion of everyone, but it does mean accepting that organized crime is no longer a world apart. It's woven into everyday life, and sometimes the people who look most ordinary are the ones hiding the darkest secrets. In the end, the Cotson case wasn't about a violent cartel or a flashy drug baron. It was about a family, ordinary on the outside, extraordinary in their deception. Daniel Cotson moved the drugs, packaging and posting them like parcels of everyday goods. His parents, Paul and Stephanie, acted as the safety net, funneling more than £500,000 into their accounts, investing hundreds of thousands, all while quietly claiming benefits. Together, they turned an ordinary household into the heart of an £800,000 laundering network. The raids, the court case, and the convictions ripped away the mask. The family pub wasn't just a community hub. The pensioner couple weren't just living out their later years quietly, and the son wasn't just another face in the crowd. They were, in the eyes of the law, conspirators in a serious drug and money laundering enterprise. For the community, the shock lingered. How many times had neighbors walked past their home, never imagining the kind of operation ticking away inside? How many people had shared a pint at the Old English Gentleman, never knowing the money behind it was tainted? The Cotsons had exploited trust, the very fabric of normal life, to hide their crimes. The case leaves us with a question. What does organized crime really look like in Britain today? It's not always gangsters with gold chains and supercars. Sometimes it's a family who look like everyone else, until you scratch the surface. As Daniel, Paul and Stephanie await their sentencing, the message from detectives is stark. Crime can wear a friendly face, but it always leaves a trail, and sooner or later someone follows it. So next time you hear about a drug empire being dismantled, remember this story. It might not be a cartel in the jungles of Colombia or a mob boss in a villa. Sometimes the empire is right around the corner, hidden in plain sight, behind the front door of an ordinary British family.